The morning of September 25, 1780, began with the quiet anticipation of a routine military inspection, but it would end by fracturing the very foundation of the American Revolution. General George Washington arrived at the sprawling highlands of the Hudson River, expecting to be greeted by his most brilliant and aggressive field commander. Instead, he found an empty headquarters and a bewildered staff. Hours later, a courier arrived bearing a thick packet of intercepted documents. As Washington broke the seal and read the papers within, the color drained from his face. The documents contained the meticulously detailed defensive blueprints of the fortress, written in a handwriting the commander-in-chief knew as well as his own. The unthinkable was suddenly etched in stark, undeniable ink. The celebrated hero of the American cause had not merely abandoned his post, he had meticulously orchestrated its destruction. The fortress was West Point, the vital jugular of the colonial defense, and the man who had just sold it to the British Crown was Benedict Arnold. The revelation hit Washington with the force of a physical blow, shattering a profound personal bond. He turned to his closest aides, his voice trembling with a despair rarely seen in the stoic leader, and whispered a question that would haunt the nation for centuries. "Arnold has betrayed us. Whom can we trust now?" This was not a distant political defection. This was an intimate, devastating knife to the heart of the colonial leadership, delivered by a man they had universally revered. To comprehend the sheer psychological terror of this West Point betrayal, one must first understand the towering pedestal upon which the traitor stood. Benedict Arnold was not a peripheral figure of questionable loyalty. He was the bleeding heart of the rebellion's military might. His early exploits defined American courage, leading desperate men through the frozen wilderness to attack Quebec, and orchestrating the critical naval delay at the Battle of Valcour Island. At the pivotal Battle of Saratoga, he had charged into the teeth of the British lines, shattering his own leg to secure a victory that convinced the French to enter the war. He bore the gruesome physical scars of his patriotism, cementing a legacy written in his own blood. Washington loved him like a son, defending him against political rivals and consistently championing his brilliance. But beneath the valor festered a toxic, quiet rot, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of narcissism and perceived victimization. A hero's ego requires constant nourishment, and the Continental Congress, bogged down in politics and regional favoritism, offered only starvation. Arnold watched in bitter agony as 5 junior officers were promoted to Major General ahead of him. He felt his blood and sacrifice were being dismissed by men who had never smelled the smoke of a battlefield. The psychological descent was slow, driven by the corrosive acid of this perceived injustice. He bled for a nation that seemed to view him with bureaucratic indifference, and that resentment began to warp his moral compass. Financial desperation soon compounded his bruised pride. Arnold lived lavishly, drowning in debt from extravagant spending while facing mounting, humiliating accusations of wartime profiteering from civil authorities in Pennsylvania. As his grievances compounded, the foundation of his loyalty crumbled, making him uniquely vulnerable to the dark whispers of espionage. Enter Peggy Shippen, the beautiful, fiercely intelligent daughter of a prominent, loyalist-leaning Philadelphia family. When Arnold married her, he did not just take a wife, he unwittingly embraced a conduit to the highest levels of British military intelligence. The moral Rubicon was crossed in the shadows of secret correspondence, guided by Peggy's connections. Using invisible ink, complex ciphers, and a network of clandestine couriers, the celebrated patriot transformed himself into a shadow known only as Mr. Moore. He reached out to the British High Command, offering to turn his coat. The price tag he placed on his soul and the lives of his countrymen was £20,000. By the summer of the 1780 treason, the scheme had crystallized around a single catastrophic target. West Point was the Gibraltar of America, a sprawling network of forts that controlled the Hudson River. If the British captured it, they would sever New England from the rest of the colonies, effectively strangling the American Revolution to death. Arnold lobbied relentlessly for command of the fortress, leveraging Washington's unwavering faith against him. The commander-in-chief, believing he was honoring a wounded veteran who could no longer ride into battle, handed Arnold the keys to the kingdom. Once installed, the deliberate, systematic sabotage began from within. He operated with the chilling efficiency of a sociopath, masking his treason behind the mundane realities of military administration. He intentionally weakened the garrison by sending troops on unnecessary woodcutting details. He allowed vital defensive walls to crumble into disrepair, ignored requests for provisions, and left the massive iron chain guarding the river vulnerable to a naval assault. Every compromised rampart and missing ration was a calculated step toward handing the American Revolution over to the British. The deception was a masterpiece of administrative treason hidden in plain sight, executed by a man whose loyalty was considered beyond reproach. His own officers noticed the alarming decay of the fortress, but their concerns were easily dismissed. Who would dare question the patriotism of the hero of Saratoga? Yet, the intricate machinery of this grand betrayal required a physical handover of the fortress blueprints and troop dispositions. To orchestrate the final surrender, the British sent their most brilliant and charismatic spymaster, Major John Andre. In the dead of night on September 21st, a small boat rowed with muffled oars to the dark, wooded shores of the Hudson River, bringing the two conspirators face to face. In the dense, suffocating darkness of the pine trees, the final, treacherous details were hammered out. Arnold handed over 6 pages of highly detailed plans, outlining the exact weaknesses of West Point and the precise avenues for a successful British assault. The papers were folded and slipped into the bottom of Major John Andre's boot, sealing a pact that was designed to end the war in a single, devastating stroke. But the architecture of treason is exceptionally fragile, often undone by the smallest stroke of fate. An unexpected American artillery barrage from the opposite shore targeted the British warship, the HMS Vulture, which had brought Andre up the river. Taking heavy fire, the ship was forced to weigh anchor and retreat downriver, leaving the British spymaster stranded behind enemy lines. The journey back to the safety of British-occupied New York became a tense, desperate gamble. Stripped of his uniform and traveling in civilian clothes under a false name, Andre attempted to navigate the lawless, contested territory known as the Neutral Ground. Near Tarrytown, New York, his luck violently evaporated when he was halted by 3 armed American militiamen patrolling the roads. Believing the men to be loyalists, Andre made a fatal miscalculation in his greeting, instantly arousing their suspicion. They ignored his frantic bribes of gold and a gold watch, dragged him into the woods, and forced him to strip. When they ordered him to remove his boots, the damning documents fell into the autumn leaves. The militiamen could not comprehend the strategic magnitude of what they held, but they knew they had caught a spy. When the captured documents were delivered to American military intelligence officers, the devastating truth began to crystallize. They recognized the handwriting on the blueprints. The unthinkable was suddenly a terrifying reality. They immediately dispatched a courier to warn General Washington, inadvertently setting off a desperate race against time. Word of the captured spy reached Arnold's headquarters on the morning of September 25th, just moments before George Washington was scheduled to arrive for his inspection. As Arnold read the dispatch detailing the capture of a man carrying suspicious papers, his composure shattered. The meticulously constructed facade of the loyal commander collapsed in an instant. He sprinted upstairs to his pregnant wife, Peggy, hastily confessing that his treason had been discovered and his life was forfeit. Leaving her screaming in a feigned hysterical fit to distract the arriving officers, the traitor bolted out the door, mounted a horse, and charged down a steep ravine to the river. He commandeered a barge and ordered the oarsmen to row furiously toward the safety of the British fleet. As his boat slipped away into the morning mist, the man who had repeatedly sacrificed his body for American liberty permanently discarded his honor for mere self-preservation. He left behind a legacy in ruins, a wife to face the wrath of his betrayed comrades, and a nation entirely exposed to the enemy. The emotional fallout rippled through the Continental Army like a seismic shockwave. If Benedict Arnold could turn, the very concept of loyalty felt like a dangerous, naive illusion. Paranoia infected the ranks, turning brothers in arms into subjects of quiet, terrifying suspicion. The psychological damage to the colonial leadership was profound, forcing them to question every officer, every order, and every whispered conversation in the dark. The reckoning for the conspiracy was swift and brutal, though the ultimate price was paid by the co-conspirator. Major John Andre was tried by a board of general officers and convicted as a spy. Despite his immense charm, his dignified bearing, and his desperate pleas for a soldier's death by firing squad, the harsh laws of war dictated a far more ignominious end. On October 2, 1780, Andre was marched to the gallows. He adjusted his own blindfold and slipped the noose around his own neck, dying with a profound stoicism that drew tears even from his American executioners. He hung from the rope, mourned by both sides of the conflict, while the true architect of the disaster safely wore a new uniform in New York. The stark contrast between Andre's dignified, tragic end and Arnold's cowardly, frantic flight burned itself into the American psyche. Arnold received his commission as a British brigadier general and a fraction of his promised blood money. He subsequently led brutal raids against his former countrymen in Virginia and Connecticut, burning the very towns he had once sworn a sacred oath to protect. Yet the reward for profound betrayal is often a life of perpetual, suffocating isolation. The British utilized his military skill, but they despised his character. British officers refused to serve under him, whispering behind his back that a man who betrays his own country can never be trusted by another. He was a mere tool of war, forever tainted by the stench of his broken oaths. Ironically, the grand betrayal that was meant to shatter the revolution ultimately served to galvanize it. The sheer horror of the conspiracy snapped the weary American public out of its prolonged lethargy. The treason became a rallying cry, a dark mirror reflecting the absolute necessity of their cause and the terrifying alternative of British subjugation. The name Benedict Arnold was systematically erased from public monuments and struck from the official rolls of honor. It ceased to belong to a historical figure and transformed into a permanent, venomous linguistic brand. To this day, his name remains universally synonymous with the ultimate, unforgivable violation of faith. In a quiet corner of the Saratoga battlefield, there stands a haunting physical manifestation of this hollowed-out legacy. It is a stone monument honoring a brilliantly wounded leg, praising the heroic charge that helped win the battle. But the monument bears no name. It refuses to acknowledge the identity of the soldier who owned that leg, leaving a permanent, glaring void where a hero's name should be. The tragedy of the 1780 treason remains a chilling masterclass in the fragility of human virtue. It forces a painful confrontation with the reality that the deepest, most destructive betrayals rarely come from our sworn enemies. They come from those we elevate to the highest pedestals, those we trust implicitly, and those whose quiet, festering resentments are allowed to eclipse their loudest oaths of loyalty.